The drum set, it's a very iconic set of instruments. It represents union, rhythm, and tempo. A basic drum set consists of 4 instruments, the drum head, bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat, and floor tom. Does anyone actually know when it was implemented in music? No one. It was around 1930, during the Jazz Age, which is the time jazz music was being circulated through American culture. Does anyone know who invented the drum set? African Americans in the Jazz Age. The Jazz Age is, as I said, is the introduction of jazz music to American culture, and it is the voice of a generation. It spoke of how a certain culture experienced the American society, and it's just the way they express themselves. Jazz implication heavily influences music today, and without it we would not have many of the genres we have now because of its techniques that introduced to the art. In this presentation I'll be speaking about what is jazz, the history behind it, and its input to music today. So first and foremost, what is jazz? Jazz is a mix of classic European music, American blues, and African drumming. It is an art form that leans on the emotion side. It allows the listener to feel and experience what the composer actually was feeling at the time of its creation. Its distinction between music at that time was that back then they only had classic music and operas, which were kind of slow and very long, and was meant just for listening, not really to dance. You've ever seen someone dance at an opera going like, yeah. But jazz is abnormally fast for its time. It was pretty fast. It introduced solos to the music genre, and a solo is what it is. It's a combination of notes during a break, a band break to be specific, and it introduced complex harmonies and intricate melodies. A little history behind jazz would be, it began around late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was during slavery in America, which, as we all know from history class, was full of grief, strife, injustice, brutality, and suppression of freedoms. In a way, this was the only freedom African Americans had that they kept with them. As I said before, Africans were brought from Africa and brought with them their musical aspects. Specifically, New Orleans was a place of tradition and celebration, and it was a melting pot of music. And that term is famously used countless times. What it means is that there's a vast amount of musical influence in that city. And to quote a famous jazz musician, Wynton Marsalis, New Orleans had a great tradition of celebration. Opera, military marching bands, folk music, blues, church music, and African drumming. It was all blended into one, and jazz was born. Well, this establishes jazz as it, I guess you would say, sprouted in New Orleans, but it wasn't really recognized as more than an African music. That all changed during the 1930s. The Great Depression hits. 40 billion worth of American stocks suddenly disappear mid-November night. Millions are left homeless, jobless, and basically live on scraps. People needed an escape. Jazz was very convenient, very affordable, and it was accessible to many of its citizens of America. And actually, I have a jazz song that I would like to play with it. Hopefully this is a song. in high demand of entertainment to get away from the troubles of the Great Depression brought, and jazz was a solution to this getaway. It was a getaway. Around 1939, America was thrusted into World War II because of the attack of Pearl Harbor. What the GIs brought to them to Europe was small forms of entertainment, and jazz was actually, music was what they brought over as one sort of entertainment. Jazz was then introduced to other countries, and before you know it, at the end of the war, jazz was accepted globally. Jazz maintained this peak of popularity until the 1960s, where TV, rock and roll, and funk took over the scene. Jazz silently watched by because by silently I mean its implications were produced in rock and roll and funk. Jazz was still played, but no one really attended jazz performances anymore. And it really has not changed since the 1960s. It is really underrated. My third point would be, why is it important to culture today? Well, without jazz, we would not have solos, which is very influential in rock music and other forms of music as well. It introduced melodies, memorable melodies. As a famous example would be Lady Gaga's songs, like who doesn't know like that poker face? I want to dance it right now, but I can't. And well, that's some examples. In conclusion, jazz is not only music, it's art. It expressed a whole time of America. It had a humble beginning and is still with us today, and I encourage you to listen to it. A famous quote by Louis Armstrong, a very famous jazz musician, and I quote, "We all can sing do, re, mi, but we must find it within ourselves to find the other notes."